I who shall not be with name, hereby proclaim to all with unclean hands. Be it now known that all words, spellings upon within this document shall be of my will and intent only, without assumption, presumption, on, of, by, for, any, all concerned, where my free will choice shall never be trespassed, where my intent is my intent and no others. Whereas a great fraud has been revealed and is laid bare, where unclean hands are now in the light for all to see, where all with unclean hands must judge only self, toto, genere. Whereas non-disclosure has intent to defraud in that act. All contracts of body, mind, soul are null and void. Protunc. Praeterea, ab initio ad infinitum. In this willful intent to commit fraud by omission and or commission, where others and all are concerned. And, whereas threat of force perceived or real is proof of intent inasmuch as aiding and abetting in this fraud, and where assumption and presumption is concerned, thus destroyed, and whereby one is known by their actions of that their willful intent, either knowingly or in ignorance of the divine laws under which all stand. So whereas all signatures, contracts, assumptions, presumptions, etc. et al. Are rendered null and void ab initio, inasmuch as all are in contempt, fraud, where the crown owned and copyright names, and go through all the all caps, are concerned. Now what this is are people that I've had or been in contract with spiritually or otherwise. Whereas the intent to commit fraud via deceptions, deceptios, and willful non-disclosure of truths, where intent to enslave all humanity, mankind, by church-state, in this intent is exposed fully, whereby one's actions make one known. And, whereas all names registered are in fact property of the Crown Vatican, all matters pertaining to such names registered, and the use thereof render all parties fraudulent in contempt via willful intent to deceive and or ignorance of use, where all matters of church-state remain matters of church-state, where use of the names registered are concerned, and where, when third-party interloping is evident by my use or anyone's use of the stated registered names. Whereas it is not my intent to commit fraud or any contemptible acts, it is also my equal intent to never aid and abet any other living soul via willfully knowing or ignorance on, in, their, my part. And any use of or claim made using the aforementioned names will render such attempts an act of fraud by willful commission. Whereas all use of church-state identification based upon these all Crown copyright names or any variations thereof render the user in fraud absolute via their ignorance and by omission of disclosure of by church-state. Whereas all claims made by all parties, agents, living souls, upon another willfully or in ignorance to do so is guilty of fraud in that action by commission and or omission of bearing false witness, and is in contempt of church, state, self, and is willfully aiding and abetting fraudulent deception, deceptios, whereupon judgment is rendered upon all agents of church, state, self, by the very action of claiming via Crown copyright fraud. Inasmuch as intent, spirit, must be proven where all are concerned, it is now incumbent upon the church state that the willful intent to commit fraud ab initio is without intent to do so. Now with prior knowledge, the agents, clergy, bar members, all bound by oaths, etc., et al., to, of, for, by, with church state, do willfully deceive humanity, and is, by the actions of all bound to church state, by oaths sworn, taken, given, judged by, of, in all acts of harm upon any and all harmed. Whereas fraudulent intent of all bound to church state entities, living souls, principalities, is visible via omission and or commission by the actions of harm, intent to harm, of, for, by all beings, using a name in fraud ab initio. All claims made, coerced, assumed, presumed, etc. et al. Are, in fact, fraudulent at source, of, for, by all claiming any and all legal names, fictional identities, titles, etc. et al., and or thus any all forms, aliases, and are of, by, for the criminal intent to do so, using the intellectual property of another, living soul, spirit, or dead fictional entity, where I am toto genre, spirit, mind, body. Furthermore, to engage in such intently destructive acts of harm, deception, theft, coercion, etc. et al., against another via any and all means, is shown by one's actions, and need never be judged, whereby the act is the judge in and of itself. Judge not, lest you be judged, where assumption, presumption cannot, does not, will not exist after the act itself. Now, furthermore, any all registering, register by omission and or commission, where full disclosure is not evident, the intent of church state, any all claiming such association, joinder by means of willful oath, signatures, cursive, titles, etc. et al., are in fact willful acts of predetermined fraud, knowingly or unknowingly, where wrongful obligations, curses, was the intent, where obligations are replaced back upon those who knowingly and or in ignorance of their fraud do so ab initio, ad infinitum, nunc pro tunc, praeterea, praeterea, praeterea. Furthermore, was never my intent to willfully use the property of another, whereas any all things registered are in fact claimed to be such intellectual property of another, namely church, state, crown, where my mother and father deceased unknowingly were in ignorance, aided and abetted of their consent into such church, state contracts, be they all forms physical, physical, spiritual, mental. Furthermore, I place the own us, back upon return to any all beings by virtue of their oaths, etc., et al., and self-judge in their acts. Any all obligations created by any all contracts, where all contracts entered into based on this fraud, original sin, intent to defraud, are nullified, null and void, ab initio, ad infinitum, nunc pro tunc. Furthermore, all obligations upon myself created via this fraud are void, inasmuch as the perceived, assumed, presumed gift, without consideration of any all names, is concerned in that a bond debt has been created in the form of a birth certificate, with an assigned debt, not value, where I was assumed, presumed to be that value without, void of my willful consent, where has been the willful intent of, by, for all parties initiating such acts of obligation upon this, their debts, whereas intent is clearly visible by any all who engage in acts of commerce, or of Babylon, using the name, mark of the beast, was, has been, will be acting in fraud, and creating harm, cannibalism, against their fellow humans, beings, since all fiat currency is based upon aforementioned bonds, and is guilty of human being trafficking of the highest order, and in defiance of creation where consumption ensues. Whereas the willful intent from any and all willful associates, members, oathed beings of church, state, crown, is evidentiary proof of, by, for any all acts perpetrated against another, where any all registered names are concerned, inasmuch as non-disclosure by aforementioned was never given. So there was no offer of full disclosure, nor was there any asking of it either. However, there was a willful intent to defraud. So whether in ignorance or not, the fraud had the intent first. Whereas any and all registered things, possessions, are in fact property of the church, court, state, crown, copyright, where any claim made by any all, not oath, to the aforementioned are matters of church, court, state, crown, inasmuch as willful trespass and enticement into slavery via third-party interloping into such matters that do not concern me, the one who shall not be of name, where my own customary calling is mine and shall never be given. Furthermore, by means of this birth certificate, long form, short form, deception, non-disclosure, willful act of fraud, the only documents ever willfully given as proof of intent to commit fraud, aid and abet fraud, by, of, for church, court, state, crown, etc., et al., and all oath bonded to willfully to such titles, fictions, corporations, where the claim is made that the aforementioned take on the role of perceived parens patria, embodiment of state, and are in fact kidnapped, abused, harmed all who have been fraudulently claimed to be a ward of admiralty, where the mother is fiduciary, the father is beneficiary ab initio. Whereas the rights of both mother-father have been stolen via non-disclosure and willful intent, as proof by actions of those, by oath, willful applications, any all claiming to be of, for, by, church, court, state, crown, in the form of birth certificate, license, marriages, family names, taxes, registrations, etc., et al. Ab initio. Therefore, is it your willful intent of this, you, of, for, by, in, church, court, state, crown, etc., at all beings, living, dead, fictions, to coerce, by force or deceptive means, to have me incriminate myself, where I am in full knowledge of this dual fraud, where willful intent to do so makes me, you, both, guilty ab initio by claiming to own, be something that is, was, has never been mine, or yours to be, or claim? Is it your, by oath, entity, intent to aid and abet the furtherance of this fraud, cannibalism, child kidnapping, human trafficking, theft, etc., et al., via fictitious acts legislation, etc., et al., by, of, for dead entities, by, for, of dead entities, the dead carrying out the dead, where I am one of the living versus a fictional dead entity created by, for, of the church, court, state, crown, by enticing me via force, coercion, deception to be a surety for the church, state, court, crown created debts? Whereas any all fraud, by virtue of its intent and creation, remains as such, regardless of length of time, taken for such any all frauds to be exposed, all contracts are null and void upon its discovery, where a fraud revealed is in fact null and void ab initio nunc pro tunc, where all energy stolen in any all forms shall be returned, where the intent to commit fraud against me has been, is, and will be with intent. It is not, nor has ever, has never been, never will be my intent to willfully and knowingly commit fraud where mistakes in ignorance by commission and or omission are present, and where any all acts of mine are not in contempt, with temptation, of anyone, anything, where any being choosing willfully to contempt me is now with intent to do so. All contracts, documents, signatures, agreements, etc. are all now null and void, where any all debt created by church, state, court, crown is forgiven, returned, from whence it was created. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Where I am the non-contracting living with the debt bond, it entity that is the property, responsibility, responsibility of that, those which created it, i.e. the crown. By one's actions, one is known and instantly judged. In, of, for, by such actions, where the intent is laid bare for all to see, in, of, by, for any, all such actions, whereas all any beings willfully by, for, of, commission, omission, are held and bound, judged of themselves. Act accordingly, lest ye be judged. In, of, for, by oneself, yourself, fully, toto genere.